space has gotten a lot better about acknowledging pain and emotion. And I mean, it's definitely changed from like my parents' generation when you just didn't talk about it anymore. You put away all the pictures. That person basically didn't exist. Like, we're not at that point anymore, but we're not quite at the point where there's enough people who have experienced traumatic grief, I think, essentially being surveyed on like what was your experience like beyond emotions, so that it's something that other people can recognize and try and help serve and support. And it sounds like your book is going to help fill that need, so that it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who's trying to support a griever has had to experience their own traumatic loss, but that they can have a broader picture than just, oh, that person's really sad all the time. Because I definitely experienced what you're talking about, that there were a lot of other symptoms of grief that I did not expect. I didn't know how to recognize them in the beginning, and I didn't have anybody to talk to who could validate, what was happening to me. And it can be really, it can add this layer of scariness, really, to what you're experiencing, in addition to everything that you're already experiencing emotionally that is heartbreaking and scary and all those things. So I think that's going to be beautiful work.
All the layers we have on top of the actual pain of loss. It's the physicality of it, it's the confusion, it's having people not validate it, expecting you to be doing better than you are. You've got the 5 stages of loss, as if grief, as if you'll get to acceptance and then brilliant, it'll all be done. Whereas we know the 5 stages, you go through them all multiple times, back and forwards, up and down, and even if you do accept your loss, it doesn't make it all right. You're still living without that person. And I do work with a lot of people who I agree, you don't have to have had the same loss to be a very good practitioner. But sometimes it does help. And I do work with a lot of people who come to me because they know what I've gone through, and so they know I'm going to get it. And I think it's when you're working with a therapist who perhaps you think, no, you really don't get it. And when I did my, because I'm a certified grief educator, when I did that course, I was amazed how many therapists were on the course, because they obviously didn't feel their training gave them enough on the subject of grief. So they didn't specify perhaps in grief. And grief had probably been part of their training, but they'd obviously had some grieving clients, and they thought, I don't know enough. I feel I need to, bolster my learning. So
which is amazing, because I think there can be the other end of the spectrum with therapists who think, oh yeah, my grandma died, when she was 90, and I was in high school, and I remember what that was like, so I know what it's like to grieve. Or my first therapist who was like, oh, my cat died, and that was devastating for me, so I understand what you're going through. And I just, it's so hard, because on the one hand, I have empathy for the fact that you struggled through something that for you was the hardest thing you've had to go through. However, comparing like your 2 weeks of sadness, even devastation maybe, to my year of not being able to sleep because my son died is not even like remotely the same. You don't understand. So it's hard, and it's a conversation I come across a lot.
Yeah.
I think a lot of grievers experience that. They hear people say, oh, I know how you feel because XYZ happened to me. And I think it takes conscientiousness that grief is not the same. It's not the same all across the board. It doesn't.
It really isn't. I mean, they say, the worst loss is your loss. And that is true. So if you've lost your cat and it's the only loss you've known, it's going to be devastating and it's going to hurt because you've nothing to compare it with. But overall, I think sensibly we have to know that there are some losses that are life changing and involve a great deal of trauma. I think it's the trauma as well that sort of adds another dimension.